All right, this is a preliminary overview of the LiDAR Motion Sensor. This is a brand new product. It's a motion sensor that uses LiDAR. It has sensors. These sensors mount in the ceiling. This is a 3-inch diameter plate that's designed to mount flush or on the surface of a ceiling. So if you want to mount it in the ceiling flush, you can mount the backing bracket, cut a 3-inch diameter hole, and then flush mount it. This one's number 1 and number 2, so you have 2 in some cases. This module will go up into the ceiling and connect with a Cat5 cable back to the controller. So this is the controller. This is a prototype, so it has a lot of extra stuff on here for the time being until the next revision gets released. So it's got some patches and hacks on here as well. So the next revision will be cleaner and have less attachments to it. So you have 64 zones, 8 by 8. You have zones 1 through 8, 9 through 16, all the way up to 57 through 64. You have 2 Cat5 cable ports here, A and B, or motion sensor 1 and 2, however you want to refer to it. This connector here goes to the miscellaneous input board on the Dado Door master controller. And on the miscellaneous input, you have inputs that behave as a safety sensor and as a motion sensor, which are 2 different types of inputs, but that'll be explained later. Okay, on the sensors themselves, there's a plate with a sensor on the back with a short 6-inch wire that goes to a microprocessor here that handles all of the scanning of the floor or whatever it's looking at. The signals, the data of all 64 zones, meaning the ranges, go through the Cat5 cable. In the microprocessor here, it takes all of the LiDAR information. LiDAR information is distances, so every zone is the distance from this sensor to whatever is being reflected off of it. So in some cases, nothing may reflect. If it's going out into the distance, nothing may reflect. However, if something reflects off of it, it returns a distance in millimeters. And I think it goes up to almost 3,000 millimeters. All right, so what happens is, as a motion sensor, what I've done is I've programmed some software to take the distance and consider an average distance, a running distance of the floor. So let's say from ceiling, where this would mount, to the floor. And if anything moves within that distance, it makes the distance become shorter. So in other words, let's use an example. Let's say from ceiling to floor, you've got 96 inches. If something enters that zone and makes the distance become, instead of 96 inches, makes it 90 inches, you can set a threshold to say, if the distance gets shortened by 6 inches, trigger that particular zone, okay? And I'll wave my hand to show, and I know this is not lighting well because there's no way to light these LEDs properly. When I wave my hand over it, it is detecting the zones that are getting triggered. Now, there's a menu here. So the menu, this is an old beginning stages, it's been changed now. So you have an A and B indicator telling you whether we're working on the A sensor or the B sensor. You scroll down to scroll through the menu settings, and you can hold it if you want to. You can see how you're kind of scrolling through a series of lights here that tell you what mode are you affecting right now. And I'll give you an example. Now these will be explained, all of the different zones will be explained in the manual. And I know it looks complicated. The initial version it looks complicated, but basically you can kind of almost turn it on and make it work. Let's go to show one setting here, for example. One of the features of this type of sensor is that we get to select the zones we want to use to trigger. So in a floor, we may not want all 64 zones on. So let's put our LED on the top row, and let's press this button. And let's say we don't want those zones on. And let's go down here, and let's say we don't want those zones on. So we can turn those off, turn on or off any zone just by pressing the buttons. And if we don't want those zones on, when we press that, let's go back up and The green ones are affecting sensor A. You can see green is here, where my finger is, green here. If we scroll down and we want to turn on and off the B sensor, it changes to B here, and then we can affect, let's say we want to turn on this zone and that zone, or whatever. Turn on and off any zone that you want. You may only want a couple of zones to trigger the door, but it's unlikely you would have all 64 zones turning on, triggering the door. That's the benefit of this, is we can pick a very precise area to trigger for the door. And then you've got safety zones, and in this case I've selected just this area here. Pretend like the door is on this side, so if you're walking through the door, you would be traveling this way, okay? And that's a good way to orient the motion sensor, so that there'll be a marking to tell you how to mount that, so that that as you're walking through the door, going away from the door, this will correspond to the orientation of the sensor, okay? There's a few more, there's quite a number of more features that don't necessarily need to be adjusted. I'll show you one example here. I'll take that back. Like I said, this is a preliminary video just to show one client that we're going to test this out with. So on the first LED, A, we're watching what is happening on sensor A. So no activity. I wave my hand, we get activity. Go to LED number 1, B. Now we're watching what is happening on sensor B, okay? And so we're only able to trigger zones that I have turned on. Remember how I went in and turned or enabled those particular zones. So I only have this particular group of LEDs on in the middle, and I turned some of them off just for testing. But back to here, you can see how we're not triggering this bottom row right here. That's because you saw me go in and turn those off. And I also turned off the top row. That's why they're not lighting up as I'm waving my hand over it. So let me think what else we need to discuss. You don't need to worry about this board. That's just a hack for this particular prototype. A is here, I'll mark that. B is here, I'll mark that. Cat 5 cable, 1 foot long, goes from here to the miscellaneous input board. And you've got 8 buttons here, 1 through 8. So if you want to select a zone, you just go to the LED for that particular row, highlight that row right here, and then you just press it to turn on and off that zone. If you want to scroll down to the bottom row, turn on and off these zones. And once you press it, it is saving those zones or saving that setting permanently. You don't have to do any saving at all. I think that's it. The manual will cover what each one of the settings means, and it'll tell you if this LED is on, that means what we're going to adjust is this. If this LED is on, we're going to adjust this. There's a number of settings. Right here we have enable the motion sensor A, B, and enable the safety sensor A and B. So here you would just turn on and off these. If you're on this setting, you can press these buttons to enable or disable the motion sensor or the safety sensor. Okay, noise immunity. There's various things in there that you may never change. There's quite a few things that you may never change, but they're there in case we want to try to tackle a problem reflection or a problem area in the floor. Okay, I think that's it for now. The bottom line is you mount these in the ceiling. This has to go through up into the ceiling, and you connect the Cat 5 cable. We are going to use my own custom color for the Cat 5 cable because this is not Ethernet, and only plug these into my system. Never plug these into an Ethernet connection somewhere. This is just a Cat 5 cable to send signals on my system. The LCD here is not included. That's just for me for testing for the prototype. Here's a USB cable. If we want to update the software, you'll use a USB printer type cable, connect here, and that's how we'll update firmware. And for this video, I think that covers it. This is just to get us up and running on the first prototype.